Hello, my name is Terry Antonelli, and I wanted to take a few minutes with you today to talk about communication in the classroom. We're going to cover four best practices for communication, and there's tons of them. This is just four uh, quick ones. We're also going to talk about why communication can be different in a classroom in higher education. And finally, we're going to talk about ways to de escalate an intense situation with a student. And these are just examples. There's tons and tons of them. These are just a couple that I've used effectively, or have seen used effectively, or have learned about. So we're going to start with best practices for communication. I watched a TED Talk that was assigned for class by Mr. Matt Abrams. And he gives four practices for communication, and they are to manage anxiety, practice the steps for effective communication, slow down and listen, and to tell a story. With managing anxiety, public speaking is nerve wracking for a lot of people, and even me sitting here with the camera, I keep looking off into space, not looking into the camera, looking down. And I'm in a house by myself. So public speaking is very nerve wracking. With that, there are steps that we can take to lessen that anxiety. One is to acknowledge that you are anxious about the situation. Um, by saying to yourself, I'm in a nerve wracking situation, I'm nervous, that takes a lot of pressure off you. You're not second guessing yourself. You know what the issue is. And as with everything, the way to get help is to first admit you have a problem. So, the problem in this case is you are nervous about public speaking. So, it's always good to address the situation head on. Reframe your conversation, your whatever you're talking about is a conversation. Involve your audience, get them involved and up and moving and actively participating in the conversation. That's kind of how I'm trying to approach this. I'm speaking to you as if you were sitting in this chair right next to me at my father's kitchen table. It's easy to have a conversation with somebody. It's not easy to get up in front of a room full of people and speak. So pick one person in the room and at a time, speak to that person. And then after a couple minutes, move on and speak to another person. It's much easier to focus on one at a time than it is on a whole group. And be present and in the moment. Mr. Abrams tells about one person that he had worked with in the past who did push-ups before every public speaking event. Do something that is in the moment. Read a book, watch TV, something, snap a rubber band. For me to be present and in the moment, I take myself out. I am a reader. I love to read. 5 minutes on my Kindle, and I'm completely zoned out to what's going on around me. And then I can focus on what I'm doing. Sometimes I even have to do it with schoolwork. I get so overwhelmed that I just have to step back and say, okay, I can't do this. I need to refocus. Next is to practice steps for effective communication. And he gives several examples, such as one, to get out of your own way. Don't make things harder than they have to be. I'm a big believer in make things smarter, not harder. And you can do this by calling things the wrong name. Give the gift practice. You give somebody a gift, they tell you what it is, and then you make up a reason why they liked it. And to use structures. And we're going to talk about structures in a little bit. You need to slow down and listen. Focus on what is around you, what is being said. So often we jump into things and we don't really listen. My husband does it to me all the time. I'll say something to him or start to say something to him. He thinks he knows what I'm going to say, and he's completely wrong. So we all, and I'm just as guilty. We all need to stop, slow down, and listen to what is being said. And then tell a story. My kids in my classroom love this. If I'm piling on about a bunch of useless information, they're like, yeah, we don't care. But if I tell them a story, they're more engaged and listening, and that works very well. Reasons why communication can be difficult in higher education. A lot of times it is because the technology that is being used and the methodology is very, very outdated. Email is still really big in higher education. Most people don't even use email. I have about 5 different emails hooked up to my phone right now, and it's a pain to have to bounce around between the 9 different accounts that I have to see who's doing what. Things get lost. It's very time consuming and it's not effective. You send me a text message, I'm right there. I can respond right away. I can make notes. So the big thing is that communication is for higher education is very outdated. A lot of times teachers have a lack of information. We just don't know what's going on in our students' lives, and they're not required to tell us. So they could be having major problems at home or outside of school, and we have no idea, and that plays out in the classroom. Well, if we're not informed, we can't adjust the situation. We can't adjust our expectations. We can't help if we don't know what's going on. And a lot of times it's background differences. I work with students that don't speak English as a first language. We have a very hard time communicating, and we have to find skills and tips and tricks to find a way to do that. I have found that Google is a wonderful resource. Google has a great translation app, or my phone has a translation app, as most people's do. So there's things that we can use with technology, oddly enough, to minimize the differences in background and language. And ways to de-escalate a situation. For me, it is talking. I use talking in my classroom all the time. I find that just sitting down with my students and saying, hey, this is where I'm coming from. You tell me where you're coming from, and hopefully we can meet in the middle. That has always, I've been in the classroom 5 years now, going on 6. That has always worked for me. But you should always go into a situation not being prejudiced about students. I'm a special ed teacher, so I get IEPs and notes from the previous year's teacher about this student and things like that. I never read those notes. I read the important stuff, what their needs are. And then I get develop my own relationship with the student, and then go back and read the notes if there's something important that I need to know. Like, I keep seeing this behavior. If I can go back into the IEP and say, oh yes, this student has had this behavior for this many years, then I can address it. Then I can look back and say, oh, this teacher did this that worked really well. I'm going to try it and see if it works for me. But I always take the time to get to know my students first. If you can, spend time with students outside the classroom. I'm home visiting. My grandfather is very ill. I'm here taking care of him for a couple of weeks. I went back to the school that I worked at here in New York, and I got to see some of my students. And you know what? They were thrilled to see me, and I was actually really thrilled to see them. It was great. But that's because I spent time with them outside of class. I went to football games, and I asked about their dance lessons. And, I grew up in this community. It's a small town. I see them at the grocery store. I bump into them at Walmart. It's important to build those communications outside of the classroom and let them see you as a real person. And treat students with respect. Students are still people. They might be younger than us, come from different, but they're still people. And they deserve to be treated with respect and understanding, just as you would another adult. They're just smaller. They have the same feelings and needs, and it's important to treat them with respect. And finally, stop and listen. It is so very important to stop and truly listen to what people are saying and to think before you speak. So those are my tips and tricks and comments on all this. So, hope they work for you, and good luck.